close your eyes and let your mind drift as we journey through one of the darker corners of the Pokemon world. From hidden entries in the Pokédex to unsettling truths about certain ghost-type creatures, these details will guide you into contemplation. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the shadows carry you into dreams. When you think of Pokemon, you might imagine colorful adventures, friendship, and triumph. But buried within the official Pokédex entries across multiple generations lies something far more haunting. There are Pokemon walking among us that were once human. Some were children who met tragic ends, others were adults transformed by circumstances beyond their control. Their stories are canon, documented in the games themselves, and they paint a picture of a world where the line between life and death, between human and creature, is far thinner than anyone wants to admit. Let's begin with perhaps the most heartbreaking case. In the Unova region, there exists a ghost-type Pokemon called Yamask. At first glance, it appears as a small shadow with glowing red eyes floating just above the ground. But look closer. Every single Yamask carries a mask. According to the Pokédex entry from Pokemon Black, this mask used to be its face when it was human. This isn't metaphorical. This isn't folklore that passed down through generations. The Pokédex states it plainly. Each Yamask carries a mask that was once its actual human face, now transformed into something else entirely. The tragedy deepens when you read the entry from Pokemon White. Each Yamask retains memories of its former life. Imagine that for a moment. You die, and instead of moving on to whatever comes next, you find yourself transformed into a creature. You're no longer human, but you remember being human. You remember your family, your friends, your life, and all you have left of that existence is a mask, a frozen reminder of the face you once wore. The Pokédex tells us that Yamask sometimes looks at its mask and cries. It weeps for what it has lost, for the life it can never return to, for the humanity stripped away. What makes Yamask particularly disturbing is the question of how many there are. For Yamask to be a recognized species with multiple documented encounters, there must be dozens, perhaps hundreds of these transformed spirits. How many people died in ways that trapped their souls in this form? What circumstances lead to this particular transformation, rather than a peaceful passing? The games never provide those answers, leaving us to wonder about the scope of this phenomenon. The Galarian variant of Yamask adds another dimension to this tragedy. In the Galar region, Yamask appears made of clay rather than shadow, still carrying a piece of its former self. The Pokédex entry from Shield reveals that this clay tablet bears an ancient curse, formed from the regrets and suffering of a human soul. These regional differences suggest that human transformation into Pokemon isn't isolated to one area or time period. It's a recurring phenomenon across the Pokemon world, happening in different regions under different circumstances, but always ending in the same tragic result. Now let's venture into the forests, where an even darker story awaits. In the Kalos region grows a Pokemon called Fontump. It resembles a small tree stump with a ghostly presence, its eyes glowing from within weathered bark. The appearance seems innocent enough, almost whimsical. But the Pokédex entry from Pokemon Sun reveals the horrifying truth. Fontump are stumps possessed by the spirits of children who died in the forest. Not adults, children. Think about what that means. These were young lives, cut short while lost among the trees. Perhaps they wandered from campsites during family trips. Maybe they chased after something deeper into the woods than they should have gone. Or they simply got turned around, unable to find their way back before night fell and the temperature dropped. Whatever the specific circumstances, these children died alone, afraid, and lost. And their spirits didn't move on. Instead, they possessed nearby tree stumps, becoming Fontump. The cruelty doesn't end with their transformation. According to multiple Pokédex entries, Fontump can imitate the voice of a crying child. They use this ability to lure people deeper into the forest, presumably to suffer the same fate. Some entries suggest they're seeking companionship, other lost souls to keep them company in their eternal wandering. The sound of a child's voice echoing through dark woods, leading travelers astray, calling them toward danger while the creature making those sounds is itself a dead child. It's a cycle of tragedy feeding more tragedy. Fontump's evolved form, Trevenant, becomes a guardian of the forest, protecting it from those who would do harm. This suggests some transformation in purpose, perhaps the acceptance of their new existence. But that initial stage, that phantom stage, represents pure loss and confusion, a child's spirit unable to comprehend what has happened, acting on instinct and loneliness. The Pokédex entry from Ultra Sun mentions that their cries sound like eerie screams. Imagine being a hiker, hearing what sounds like a child in distress, following that sound to help, only to discover it's the ghost of a child who died in these very woods. The number of phantom documented suggests this isn't a rare occurrence. Multiple children have died in forests across the Pokémon world. Multiple young spirits have been trapped in this form. Some Pokédex entries from later generations try to soften this by suggesting phantom are benevolent, seeking friends rather than victims. But even that interpretation doesn't erase the fundamental tragedy. These are children who should be alive, growing up, experiencing the world. Instead, they're bound to tree stumps, forever wandering the places where their lives ended. Let's shift now to a different kind of transformation, one that happens not through death, but through something equally disturbing. In the Kanto region exists a psychic-type Pokémon called Kadabra. It's been around since the very first generation of Pokémon games, recognizable by its yellow body, mustache-like features, and the silver spoon it carries. For years, it was simply accepted as another creature in a world full of strange beings. Then came Generation 3, and with it came entries that suggested something far more unsettling about this species. The Pokédex entry from Pokémon Fire Red presents what it describes as a rumor. It happened one morning, the entry claims. A boy with extrasensory powers awoke in bed transformed into Kadabra. Not gradually over time, not through some mystical ritual. He simply went to sleep as a human child and woke up as something else. The entry from Pokémon Emerald echoes this, framing it as speculation that the transformation occurred while the boy was assisting with research into extrasensory powers. Pokémon Sun explicitly labels this as a theory, suggesting that the boy couldn't control his psychic powers and ended up transformed. This story carries echoes of Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, the classic novella about a man who wakes to find himself transformed into an insect. The developers clearly drew inspiration from that work, but they applied it to a child rather than an adult. Imagine being that boy, going to sleep in your bed in your room surrounded by familiar things, then waking to find your body has changed completely. Your hands are different, your perspective has shifted. You look in a mirror and see not your own face, but the features of a creature you may have seen before, a Pokémon that people capture and train for battles. Unlike Yamask, which explicitly retains memories of its human life, the Pokédex doesn't clarify whether Kadabra remembers being human. We don't know if that boy, if the story is true, understands what happened to him. Does he remember his family, his friends? Does he try to communicate his true identity, only to find he can no longer form human words? Or did the transformation erase his human consciousness entirely, leaving only instinct and psychic power? The games offer no answers, which makes the ambiguity all the more unsettling. Not knowing allows our minds to fill in the gaps with increasingly dark possibilities. The recurring nature of these entries across multiple games suggests this isn't meant to be dismissed as merely playground gossip within the Pokémon world. It's presented consistently, even if qualified as rumor or theory. If we take it at face value, somewhere in the history of the Pokémon world, at least one boy with psychic powers may have transformed into a Kadabra. And if it happened once, could it happen again? Are there other children with latent psychic abilities, unaware that one morning they might wake up as something other than human? The developers clearly drew inspiration from Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, applying that existential horror to a child rather than an adult, and leaving players to wonder whether this transformation is documented fact or cautionary legend. Now we come to one of the original Ghost-type Pokémon, a creature that has haunted the series since the very beginning. Gengar, the final evolution of the Ghastly line, has been a fan favorite for decades. Its mischievous grin and powerful moves made it a staple of competitive teams. But the Pokédex entry from Pokémon Moon revealed something that casts its entire existence in a different light. It apparently wishes for a traveling companion. Since it was once human itself, It tries to create one by taking the lives of other humans. Let that sink in. Gengar was once human. It remembers being human, and it's so lonely, so desperate for companionship, that it kills other humans in an attempt to transform them into beings like itself. This entry doesn't specify if Gengar succeeds in these attempts. We don't know if the humans it kills become other Gengar, or if they transform into different Pokemon, or if they simply die without transformation. But the intent is clear. Gengar is trying to recreate the connection it once had as a human by forcing that same transformation onto others. The loneliness suggested by this entry is profound. Gengar isn't depicted as evil or malicious in its core nature. It's depicted as tragically lonely, unable to connect with other Pokemon in the way it desires because it remembers human connection and finds everything else lacking. It seeks someone who can understand what it has lost, what it has become, and the only way it knows to create that understanding is to make others undergo the same transformation it experienced. Various Pokédex entries from other games paint Gengar as mischievous, hiding in shadows, mimicking people's movements to frighten them, lurking in bedrooms on cold nights. But knowing it was once human adds context to all of that behavior. Perhaps it's drawn to human spaces because it remembers living in them. Perhaps it frightens people because it's testing them, seeing how they react, searching for someone who might recognize something familiar in this creature. Perhaps its presence in bedrooms isn't meant to be threatening, but rather an attempt to be near sleeping humans, remembering what it was like to sleep as one. Moving from individual tragedy to collective horror, we encounter Spirit Doom. Bound to an odd keystone, this ghost and dark-type Pokemon has been part of the series since Generation 4. Its Pokédex entry from Pokemon Diamond establishes its disturbing origin. It is formed from exactly 108 spirits. Multiple other entries across various games confirm that these spirits were trapped in the keystone as punishment for misdeeds committed 500 years ago. While the games don't explicitly state these are all human spirits, the context strongly suggests at least some were. Human souls bound together as collective punishment. The number 108 holds significance in Buddhist tradition, representing the number of worldly desires that lead to suffering. On New Year's Eve in Japan, temple bells ring 108 times to dispel these temptations. The developers clearly drew from the symbolism when creating Spiritomb, but within the context of the Pokemon world, it means 108 individual beings, possibly including children, were somehow bound together into a single entity as punishment. Imagine being one of those 108 souls. You died 500 years ago, but instead of moving on, you were trapped. And you're not alone in your prison. You're merged with 107 other spirits, all of you compressed into one being, unable to separate, unable to escape. The Pokédex entries from various games mention that Spiritomb was bound to the keystone because of constant mischief and misdeeds. But were all 108 souls guilty? Or were some innocents caught up in collective punishment? Were some of them children who happened to be in the wrong place when whatever spell or curse created Spiritomb was cast? The entries from Pokemon Legends Arceus add another layer to this tragedy. In that game, Spiritomb's souls appear as 108 purple wisps scattered across the region. Collecting them all reveals that one of the wisps is actually a woman named Vessa, who has been searching for the other wisps. She provides the final wisp herself before disappearing, at which point Spiritomb manifests. This suggests that at least some of the souls within Spiritomb retain enough consciousness to act independently under certain circumstances, which raises questions about what it's like to be trapped in that collective existence for centuries. If one spirit can maintain identity and purpose, what about the others? Are they all aware, all conscious, all trapped together in that keystone? In the Kalos region, we find Honedge, a Pokemon that resembles a medieval sword. Multiple Pokédex entries establish that Honedge is formed when a departed spirit inhabits a sword, but the entry from Pokemon Sword itself provides the darkest detail. Honedge's soul once belonged to a person who was killed a long time ago by the sword that makes up Honedge's body. Read that again. The person's spirit possesses the very weapon that killed them. This creates a nightmarish scenario. Imagine being murdered with a sword, and in your final moments, somehow your spirit doesn't move on, but instead fuses with the blade that ended your life. You become the instrument of your own death. You're bound to it forever, unable to escape the object that took everything from you. And then, as Honedge, you're picked up by trainers who make you battle, who sheath and unsheath you repeatedly, who treat you as a tool exactly as the original wielder of that sword treated their weapon. The Pokédex mentions that Honedge will wrap its blue cloth around anyone who tries to hold it, draining their life energy. This aggressive response makes sense in context. If you were killed by a sword and then became that sword, you'd probably be hostile toward anyone trying to wield you, trying to use you as a weapon again. The life-draining ability could be interpreted as revenge, as a defense mechanism, or simply as the natural result of a traumatized spirit lashing out at any reminder of what happened to it. Then there's Froslass, an ice and ghost type found in snowy mountain regions. Its Pokédex entries across multiple games establish that, according to legends, a woman who was lost on an icy mountain was reborn as Froslass. The entry from Pokémon Scarlet gets more specific, stating that after a woman met her end on a snowy mountain, her regrets lingered on, and from them, this Pokémon was born. The phrasing, legends say, and according to, introduces some ambiguity, framing this as regional folklore rather than confirmed fact. But the consistency across games, combined with Froslass's design and behavior, suggests these legends hold truth within the Pokémon world. Froslass draws inspiration from the Yuki Onna of Japanese folklore, a snow woman spirit that appears to travelers in blizzards. But within the Pokémon world, this isn't just cultural reference. The entries present it as documented reality, or at least as widely accepted legend. Women have died on mountains, died from exposure or falls or avalanches, and their spirits, according to these accounts, haven't moved on. Instead, they transformed into Froslass, creatures that now hunt other humans, freezing them and taking them back to their dens. The Pokédex entry from S.H.I.E.L.D. adds that Froslass freezes hikers who come to climb snowy mountains and only goes after men it thinks are handsome. This detail, while seeming almost whimsical in its specificity, actually deepens the tragedy if we accept the transformation story. It implies that Froslass retains human aesthetic preferences, human desires, human loneliness. She's attempting to collect companions, to surround herself with frozen statues, because she remembers attraction, remembers wanting connection, but she's now a creature that can only preserve that connection through death. Multiple entries mention that Froslass can be heard knocking at doors during terrible blizzards, with warnings not to open if you hear it. This creates an image of a spirit still bound to human behaviors, literally knocking on doors, seeking entry, seeking warmth, seeking any acknowledgement from the human world it once belonged to, but can no longer truly rejoin. And anyone who does open that door, according to these entries, faces potential freezing, adding one more statue to Froslass's collection of frozen companions. Whether this represents actual documented encounters or regional superstition passed down through generations, the Pokédex records it as part of Froslass's established lore. These aren't the only Pokémon with human origins. Drifloon is formed from the spirits of people and Pokémon gathering together. Bennett was once a discarded plush doll that came to life through the grudge of the child who threw it away. Sandygast is created when vengeful spirits possess sand mounds that children built. Each entry reveals another instance of human souls transforming, morphing, fragmenting, or possessing objects to become Pokémon. What makes all of this particularly unsettling is that it's not presented as rare or exceptional within the Pokémon world. These species have Pokédex numbers. They can be encountered in the wild or obtained through various means. Trainers capture them, battle with them, trade them. The existence of Yamask, Phantump, Kadabra, and the others is normalized. Nobody in the games expresses particular horror at the revelation that they're training a creature that used to be a human child. It's simply accepted as part of how the world works. The Pokédex entries across different games sometimes qualify these origins with phrases like "it is said," or "legends tell," or "rumored," which introduces a layer of ambiguity. Are these confirmed facts within the Pokémon world, or are they folklore that the Pokédex has recorded without verification? Some fans interpret the Pokédex as an unreliable narrator, essentially a compilation of regional myths and observed behaviors, rather than scientific certainty. This reading would make the entries cultural stories rather than literal truth, but even accepting that interpretation doesn't eliminate the darkness. It means people within the Pokemon world tell tales of children dying and becoming Phantump, of humans transforming into Kadabra, of spirits trapped in keystones. And whether those stories are literally true or not, they reveal a world where such transformations are at least considered plausible, where the boundary between human and Pokemon is as thin enough that these legends persist across generations and regions. The games themselves offer no explanation for why these transformations happen. There's no established mechanism, no clear rules about what causes a human spirit to become Yamask, specifically versus Gengar or Phantump or Drifloon. Is it based on the manner of death, the emotional state at the moment of passing, the location, the individual's latent supernatural potential? The games remain silent on these questions, leaving us to speculate. What we're left with is a world that seems bright and colorful on the surface, where children embark on adventures with their Pokemon partners, striving to become champions, but underneath that surface exists a darker reality. Children die in forests and become Phantump. People die on mountains and become Ferozlas. Boys with psychic powers wake up transformed into Kadabra. Humans die and their spirits, unable or unwilling to move on, become trapped in various forms as Ghost-type Pokémon. And all of this is documented, cataloged, studied, and ultimately accepted as normal within this world. The trainers who catch these Pokémon likely don't think about the implications. They see a rare ghost type, a powerful addition to their team, a creature with unique abilities useful in battle. They don't see a dead child, a transformed human, a soul trapped in a form it never asked for. Or perhaps some trainers do understand and simply compartmentalize, treating it as one of those uncomfortable truths better left unexamined. After all, if you thought too deeply about the origins of your Yamask, could you still send it into battle? Could you still keep it in a Pokeball, stored away until you need its power? These entries have persisted across multiple generations of games, across different developers in different regions. The core concepts established for Yamask, Phantump, and others haven't been retconned or softened significantly. If anything, newer entries have added more detail, more confirmation, more instances of this phenomenon. It suggests a deliberate choice by the creators to maintain this darker element of the lore, even as the games themselves remain accessible to children. Perhaps that's the most unsettling aspect of all. These dark Pokédex entries exist in games marketed to young audiences. Children playing Pokemon are encountering these stories, reading about dead kids becoming tree stumps, about human spirits trapped in masks, about transformation and loss and tragedy. The games present it matter-of-factly, without dwelling on the horror, trusting young players to either gloss over the implications or process them in their own way. And so we return to where we began, to the recognition that the Pokemon world contains multitudes. It's a place of adventure and friendship, yes, but it's also a place where the boundary between human and Pokemon can dissolve, where death doesn't always mean the end, and where transformation into something other than human is a documented, recurring phenomenon. Children become Phantump, adults become Yamask, boys become Kadabra, women become Ferozlas, souls gather into Spiritomb, and all of it continues, generation after generation, new entries in the Pokédex documenting new instances of this eternal tragedy. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll think differently about the Pokemon world. Perhaps you'll wonder about the Yamask you caught, whether it remembers its human face. Perhaps you'll consider the Phantump you encountered in that forest, whether it was once a child who simply got lost. The games will never tell you the full stories of these individual creatures. They remain mysteries, fragments of tragedy preserved in code and text, waiting to be discovered by players willing to read carefully and think deeply about what those words really mean. Sweet dreams. If you found this journey through Pokemon's darker lore interesting, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into gaming mysteries and obscure facts. There's always more to discover in the worlds we think we know so well. Until next time, rest easy.